The world stopped spinning the moment Ethan and Evan said the words aloud. In their childhood home, a modest split level in suburban Ohio, the air thickened with the weight of truth. "We're gay," they declared in unison, their voices trembling but resolute, standing shoulder to shoulder in the living room where they'd once built forts out of couch cushions. Their mother, Karen, froze, her coffee mug halfway to her lips. Their father, Tom, a man of few words and fewer emotions, let his newspaper fall to the floor. Ethan, always the bolder twin, squeezed Evan's hand, anchoring them both against the storm they knew was coming. They were 22, identical in their sandy blonde hair and sharp blue eyes, but worlds apart in how the world would receive them. The silence shattered when Karen stood, her face softening as she crossed the room to Evan. "Oh, honey," she whispered, pulling him into a hug so tight it seemed to mend every fracture in his heart. Evan melted into her, tears spilling, the relief of her acceptance washing over him like a warm tide. But Ethan stood untouched, his hand still outstretched, waiting for a warmth that never came. Tom's voice cut through the moment, low and venomous. "You," he spat, pointing at Ethan. "You're no son of mine." The words landed like a blade, slicing through the fragile hope Ethan had clung to. Before he could respond, Tom was on his feet, his face red with rage. "Get out. Now." Evan's head snapped up, his voice breaking. "Dad, no. Ethan's your son, too." But Tom's eyes were locked on Ethan, unyielding, as if Evan's plea was just static. Karen stood frozen, her arms still around Evan, her silence louder than any shout. Ethan's heart pounded, his vision blurring as he stumbled toward the door, the weight of rejection crushing his chest. The screen door slammed behind him, the summer air heavy with the scent of cut grass and betrayal. Ethan stood on the porch, his backpack slung over one shoulder, the life he'd known reduced to the clothes on his back and the sting of his father's words. Across the street, a neighbor paused mid-lawn mow, staring. Ethan didn't care. He was already falling, spiraling into a world where he was no longer a twin, no longer a son, just a stranger in his own story. Ethan walked until the sun dipped below the horizon, his sneakers scuffing the cracked sidewalks of their small town. His phone buzzed. Evan, probably, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. What could Evan say? That he was sorry? That he'd fix this? Ethan loved his brother, but the image of their mother's arms around Evan while Ethan stood alone burned too deeply. He found himself at Willow Park, the place where they'd spent countless summers, where they'd first whispered their truths to each other under the stars. He sank onto a bench by the pond, the same one where he and Evan had carved their initials as kids. The wood was worn now, their marks barely visible, much like Ethan felt in that moment. He traced the grooves with his thumb, wondering how two people so alike could face such different fates. They'd come out together, planned it for months, rehearsed the words until they felt unbreakable. But Ethan had always known, deep down, that their father's love came with conditions. Evan was the golden child, quieter, gentler, the one who never rocked the boat. Ethan was the firebrand, the one who questioned, who pushed. And now, he was the one paying the price. His phone buzzed again, a text from Evan. "Where are you? I'm coming to find you." Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't want Evan's pity, but he couldn't deny the pull of their bond. They were twins, two halves of a whole, their lives intertwined since the womb. Yet tonight, that bond felt like a chain tethering Ethan to a family that didn't want him. He typed a reply, Willow Park, and hit send before he could change his mind. The pond rippled in the moonlight, reflecting a sky that felt too vast, too indifferent. Ethan's thoughts drifted to the first time he'd kissed a boy, a stolen moment behind the high school bleachers with a senior named Jake. It had been clumsy, exhilarating, and terrifying, but it was the first time Ethan felt truly alive. Evan had been the first person he told, and Evan had just smiled, saying, "Me too." That night, they'd promised to face the world together, no matter what. But now, as Ethan sat alone, the weight of no matter what pressed down on him. He didn't know how to navigate a world where his twin was embraced while he was cast out. The park was quiet, save for the distant hum of crickets and the occasional car passing by. Ethan's eyes stung, but he refused to cry. He'd always been the strong one, the one who carried them both through their father's cold silences and their mother's anxious hovering. He wouldn't break now. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path, and Ethan's heart lifted despite itself. Evan appeared, his face pale in the moonlight, his eyes red from crying. "Ethan," he said, his voice thick with guilt. "I didn't know he'd." "Don't." Ethan cut him off, his voice sharp. "Don't say you're sorry. It's not your fault." But the words felt hollow, and the space between them crackled with unspoken hurt. Evan sat beside him, close but not touching, as if afraid Ethan might shatter. "I'm not staying in that house without you," Evan said quietly. "If you're out, I'm out." Ethan laughed, a bitter sound. "Don't be stupid, Ev. You've got Mom. You've got a home. Don't throw that away for me." "It's not a home if you're not there," Evan insisted, his voice breaking. "We're twins. We do this together." Ethan looked at his brother, seeing the mirror of his own face, the same jawline, the same freckles across the nose. But where Ethan's eyes burned with defiance, Evan's were soft, pleading. For a moment, Ethan wanted to believe they could fight this together, that their bond could overcome anything. But the memory of their father's voice, "You're no son of mine," echoed too loudly. "We'll figure it out," Ethan said finally, though he didn't know how. The night stretched on, the pond reflecting their uncertain future, and for the first time, Ethan wondered if their twin bond could survive a world that loved one and hated the other. The dawn broke over Willow Park, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, but Ethan felt none of its warmth. He and Evan had stayed on the bench all night, talking in fits and starts, their words heavy with fear and hope. Evan's resolve to leave home with Ethan was unwavering, but Ethan couldn't shake the guilt of dragging his brother into his exile. "You don't have to do this," Ethan said again, his voice hoarse from hours of arguing. "You got a place to go back to." Evan's eyes flashed with rare defiance. "And what? Leave you to sleep on the streets?" "We're in this together, Ethan. Always have been." His words were a lifeline, but they also tightened the knot in Ethan's chest. Together or not, they were now two young men with no money, no plan, and a town that would whisper their names with judgment. They decided to head to Columbus, the nearest city with a chance at anonymity and opportunity. Ethan had a friend there, Marcus, who'd moved away after high school and always said his door was open. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They pooled their cash, $1.87 between them, and caught a bus at the edge of town, the driver eyeing their disheveled clothes but saying nothing. As the bus rumbled past cornfields and strip malls, Ethan stared out the window, his reflection a ghost against the passing landscape. Evan sat beside him, silent but close, their shoulders brushing with every bump in the road. Columbus greeted them with the hum of city life, horns blaring, neon signs flickering, people moving with purpose. Marcus met them at the station, his warm smile a stark contrast to the cold rejection of their father. "You two look like hell," he said, pulling them both into a hug. Marcus was tall, broad-shouldered, with a laugh that could fill a room. He'd been out since high school, unapologetic and proud, and Ethan had always envied his confidence. "You're crashing in my place," Marcus said, leading them to his small apartment in the short north, a vibrant neighborhood alive with art galleries and rainbow flags. The apartment was cramped, with mismatched furniture and a pull-out couch that would be their bed, but it felt like a sanctuary. Over cheap pizza, Marcus listened as they recounted the night before, his face darkening with every detail. "Your dad's a piece of work?" Marcus said, shaking his head. "But you're here now. You'll figure it out." He offered them his couch for as long as they needed and promised to ask around about jobs. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep Ethan from spiraling. That night, as Evan slept soundly on the couch, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The city's pulse thrummed outside, a world so different from the suffocating quiet of their hometown. He thought of their mother, her silence as damning as their father's words. Why hadn't she fought for him? The question gnawed at him, but he pushed it down, focusing instead on the plan forming in his mind. They'd find jobs, save money, build a life. He'd prove to their father, and to himself, that he didn't need anyone's approval to survive. The next morning, Marcus took them to a local diner where a friend, Lila, was the manager. She was a no-nonsense woman with a sharp wit and a soft spot for strays. "You boys ever waited tables?" she asked, eyeing them over her glasses. They hadn't, but Ethan's quick charm and Evan's earnestness won her over. She hired them on the spot, warning them it'd be grueling work for minimum wage plus tips. "Don't screw it up," she said, but her smile was kind. The diner became their lifeline. Ethan thrived in the chaos, flirting with customers for better tips, his grin masking the ache in his heart. Evan was quieter, methodical, but his genuine warmth earned him his own regulars. They worked double shifts, their days a blur of coffee pots and greasy plates, but the routine gave them purpose. At night, they'd collapse on Marcus's couch, sharing stories of rude customers and small victories, their laughter a fragile bridge over the pain they carried. But the cracks in their bond began to show. Evan called their mother every few days, his voice softening as she apologized, promising to talk to their father. Ethan refused to join the calls, his anger a wall he couldn't scale. "She didn't stand up for me, Ev," he snapped one night after Evan hung up. "Why do you keep pretending she's going to fix this?" "She's trying," Evan said, his voice pleading. "She loves us both." "Then why am I the one out here?" Ethan's words were sharp, cutting deeper than he meant. Evan flinched, and the silence that followed was heavier than any they'd faced. Ethan wanted to apologize, but the hurt was too raw, too tangled with the fear that Evan might one day choose their family over him. Their first month in Columbus passed in a haze of work and survival. Ethan found solace in the city's nightlife, sneaking into bars with Marcus, where he met others like him, people who'd been cast out but refused to break. One night, he met Noah, a bartender with a crooked smile and eyes that saw through Ethan's bravado. Noah listened as Ethan poured out his story, his voice thick with whiskey and pain. "You're stronger than you think," Noah said, his hand brushing Ethan's. It was the first time since the park bench that Ethan felt seen. Evan, meanwhile, clung to routine, his days anchored by the diner and his calls to their mother. But Ethan could see the toll it took. Evan's smiles were forced, his eyes shadowed with guilt. They were still twins, still bound by an invisible thread, but the world was pulling them in different directions. Ethan wanted to fight, to carve out a place where he belonged. Evan wanted to heal, to bridge the gap between past and present, and neither knew if they could do it together. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Ethan wiped down tables, his mind elsewhere. 3 months in Columbus had hardened him, his defiance now a shield against the world's judgment. He and Evan were surviving, but the distance between them grew with every passing day. Ethan spent his nights with Noah, whose easy laughter and gentle touches were a balm to his wounds. Evan, meanwhile, buried himself in work, his calls to their mother growing longer, more desperate. One evening, as they closed the diner, Lila pulled Ethan aside. "You're good at this," she said, gesturing to the bustling restaurant. "But you're carrying something heavy. Want to talk?" Ethan hesitated and used a kindness without strings. He shook his head, but her words lingered, a reminder that he wasn't as invisible as he felt. That night, Noah took Ethan to a local LGBTQ+ community center, a converted warehouse pulsing with life. Drag queens strutted on a makeshift stage. Activists handed out flyers, and couples danced under fairy lights. Ethan felt a spark of belonging, a sense that he could be more than the son his father rejected. Noah introduced him to a group of organizers planning a pride event, and Ethan found himself volunteering, eager to channel his anger into something bigger. Evan, however, stayed on the sidelines. He tagged along to the center at Ethan's insistence, but kept to himself, his eyes distant. "This isn't me," he admitted one night as they walked back to Marcus's apartment. "I don't want to fight the world, Ethan. I just want to be okay." Ethan's frustration flared. "You think I want to fight? I'm doing this so we don't have to hide anymore." But Evan's silence said what words couldn't. He wasn't sure he could follow Ethan into this new world. The rift between them widened, each twin grappling with their own version of survival. Then came the letter. It arrived at the diner, addressed to Evan in their mother's neat handwriting. Ethan watched as Evan tore it open, his face crumpling as he read. "She wants me to come home," Evan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Dad's softening. "She says he's willing to talk." Ethan's heart sank, a mix of hope and dread. "And me?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Evan's eyes dropped. "She didn't mention you." The words were a punch, stealing Ethan's breath. He turned away, his hands shaking as he busied himself with cleaning the counter. Evan reached for him, but Ethan shrugged him off. "Go," he said, his voice cold. "If that's what you want, go." "I'm not leaving you," Evan said, but the crack in his voice betrayed his doubt. Ethan didn't respond, the weight of their fractured bond too much to bear. The next week was a blur of tension. Ethan threw himself into the Pride event, designing posters and rallying volunteers, his energy a mask for the storm inside him. Noah was a steady presence, his quiet support grounding Ethan when the world felt too heavy. One night, as they lay in Noah's tiny apartment, Ethan confessed his fear. "What if Evan goes back? What if I lose him?" Noah held him close, his voice soft but firm. "You're not losing him. You're finding yourself. And maybe he needs to do the same." Meanwhile, Evan wrestled with his own choices. He loved Ethan fiercely, but the pull of home was strong. Their mother's calls painted a picture of reconciliation, of a father who might one day understand. But every time Evan imagined going back, he saw Ethan's face, the pain in his eyes, as their father's rejection echoed between them. He couldn't abandon his twin, but he didn't know how to stay in a world that felt so foreign. The Pride event arrived, an explosion of color and music in the heart of Columbus. Ethan stood on the main stage, his voice ringing out as he shared his story to a crowd of hundreds. "I was thrown out for being who I am," he said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The crowd roared, and for the first time, Ethan felt like he belonged to something bigger than himself. Evan watched from the sidelines, his heart swelling with pride and pain. He wanted to join Ethan, to stand in that light, but fear held him back. As the event wound down, he found Ethan by the stage, sweaty and exhilarated. "You were amazing," Evan said, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan's smile faltered. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Evan's silence was answer enough. They stood there, the noise of the crowd fading into the background, two brothers caught between love and loss. "I need to try," Evan said finally. "For Mom, for Dad, but I'm not giving up on us." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "Do what you have to do, but don't expect me to wait." The words were harsh, but they were honest, and Evan understood. They hugged, a fierce, desperate embrace, and for a moment, they were just twins again, unbreakable. Evan left for home the next morning, his backpack slung over his shoulder, his heart heavy with hope and guilt. Ethan watched the bus pull away, Noah's hand on his shoulder, the only thing keeping him upright. The city buzzed around him, alive with possibility, but Ethan felt the weight of being alone for the first time in his life. Ethan threw himself into his new life, the void left by Evan's departure a constant ache. Columbus had become his home, its streets and faces a canvas for his reinvention. The Pride event had sparked something in him, a fire to fight for a world where no one else would face the rejection he had. He took a second job at the community center, leading workshops for queer youth, his voice growing stronger with every story he shared. Noah was by his side, their relationship deepening into something Ethan hadn't dared hope for, love, steady and real. But late at night, when the city quieted, Ethan's thoughts turned to Evan. They texted sporadically, Evan's messages filled with cautious optimism about their parents. "Dad's going to therapy," one read. "Mom says he's trying." Ethan wanted to believe it, but the memory of his father's voice, "You're no son of mine," was a wound that hadn't healed. He didn't respond to those texts, afraid of the hope they might ignite. Evan, back in their hometown, navigated a different kind of struggle. Their mother was warm, her hugs a constant reassurance, but their father remained a fortress of silence. Tom attended therapy, prodded by Karen's insistence, but his eyes still avoided Evan's, his words clipped and careful. Evan felt like a guest in his own home, tiptoeing around the truth of who he was. He missed Ethan's fire, his unapologetic courage, and the guilt of leaving gnawed at him daily. One evening, Evan found a photo album buried in the attic, its pages filled with pictures of him and Ethan as kids, grinning at birthday parties, splashing in the community pool, their arms slung around each other. The images were a reminder of the bond they'd shared, unbreakable until the world tore it apart. Evan traced their smiling faces, his resolve hardening. He couldn't stay in a house that rejected his twin. He needed to fight for them both. He confronted their father that night, his voice trembling but firm. "You can't love me and hate Ethan," he said, standing in the living room where it all began. "We're the same. If you can't accept him, you're not accepting me." Tom's face tightened, but for the first time he didn't lash out. He just nodded, a small crack in his armor, and Evan clung to that sliver of hope. Meanwhile, Ethan's life in Columbus was taking shape. He and Noah moved into a tiny apartment together, their walls covered with posters from Pride events and photos of their new friends. Ethan was becoming a leader in the community, his name known in circles that mattered. But the absence of Evan was a shadow he couldn't shake. He wondered if Evan was happy, if he'd found peace in their parents' world. The thought of Evan fitting back into that life, while Ethan built a new one, felt like a betrayal of their twinhood. Then came a call. It was Karen, her voice shaking with urgency. "Evan's gone," she said. "He left a note saying he's coming to you." Ethan's heart raced, a mix of relief and fear. He hadn't realized how much he'd been waiting for Evan to choose him until that moment. Evan arrived in Columbus 2 days later, his eyes hollow but determined. They met at the diner, the same place where they'd found their footing months ago. Ethan stood frozen as Evan walked in, their resemblance still startling, like seeing his own reflection. "I couldn't stay," Evan said, his voice breaking. "Not without you." Ethan pulled him into a hug, the weight of their separation melting away. They sat in a booth, the diner quiet around them, and Evan told him everything: the photo album, the confrontation, the realization that their father's change was too slow, too uncertain. "I'm done waiting for him to love us," Evan said. "I want to be here with you." For the first time in months, Ethan felt whole. They talked until the diner closed, their laughter echoing in the empty space, rebuilding the bridge between them. Noah joined them, his presence a quiet support, and Ethan realized that family wasn't just blood. It was the people who chose you, who fought for you. But the past wasn't done with them. A week later, Karen showed up at the diner, her face lined with exhaustion. "Your father wants to see you," she said, looking at both of them. "He's trying. He's not there yet, but he's asking for you." Ethan's instinct was to say no, to protect the life he'd built. But Evan's eyes held a quiet plea, a hope that maybe, just maybe, their father could change. Against his better judgment, Ethan agreed to go back, just once, to see if the man who'd thrown him out could ever see him as a son again. They drove to their hometown in silence, the familiar streets a map of their past. As they pulled into the driveway, Ethan's heart pounded, the memory of that night flooding back. Evan reached for his hand, their fingers interlocking, and Ethan knew that whatever happened, they'd face it together. The house looked smaller than Ethan remembered, its white siding faded, the porch steps creaking under their weight. Inside, the air was thick with tension, The same living room where their lives had split apart, now a stage for reconciliation or ruin. Tom sat in his armchair, his face lined with new creases, his hands clasped tightly. Karen stood by his side, her eyes pleading for this to work. Evan squeezed Ethan's hand, a silent vow that they were still in this together. "Sit," Tom said, his voice gruff but lacking the venom Ethan remembered. They sat on the couch, side by side, their shoulders brushing as if to anchor each other. Ethan's pulse raced, his body braced for rejection, but he kept his eyes on his father, refusing to look away. "I've been talking to someone," Tom began, his words halting. "A therapist. About everything." He glanced at Karen, who nodded encouragingly. "I was wrong. Well, I said to you, Ethan, what I did, it was wrong." The words hit Ethan like a wave, threatening to pull him under. He wanted to believe them, but the memory of that night, his father's rage, the door slamming shut, was a scar that still bled. "Why now?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "What changed?" Tom's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "I thought I was protecting this family. Thought I was doing what a father should. But I lost you." And then Evan left, and I realized his voice cracked, and he cleared his throat. I realized I'd lost both my sons. Evan's hand tightened around Ethan's, a silent plea to listen, to hope. But Ethan's heart was a battlefield, torn between forgiveness and the pain that had shaped him. "You threw me out," he said, his voice low but sharp. "You looked at me like I was nothing. How do I trust you now?" Tom's eyes dropped, and for the first time, Ethan saw shame in his father's face. "You don't have to trust me yet," Tom said. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for a chance to show you I can be better." Karen stepped forward, her voice soft. "We want you both home. Not just Evan. Both of you." Her eyes locked on Ethan's, and he saw the mother he'd missed, the one who'd failed him but was now fighting to make it right. The room fell silent, the weight of their history pressing down. Ethan looked at Evan, whose eyes were bright with hope, and felt the pull of their twin bond, stronger than ever. They'd faced the world together, survived its cruelty, and now stood at a crossroads. Ethan could walk away, protect the life he'd built, or he could take a risk on the family that had once broken him. "I'm not moving back," Ethan said finally, his voice firm. "I've got a life in Columbus. Friends. Noah. I'm not giving that up." He paused, his gaze shifting to his father. "But I'm willing to talk, to try. That's all I can promise." Tom nodded, a flicker of relief in his eyes. "That's enough." The rest of the visit was tentative, a fragile dance of words and silences. They stayed for dinner, the table set with their mother's lasagna, a taste of childhood that felt both familiar and foreign. Tom asked about their lives in Columbus, his questions clumsy but genuine. Ethan spoke of the community center, of Noah, of the Pride event that had changed him. Evan shared stories of the diner, his voice lighter than it had been in months. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. When they left, the night air was cool, the stars bright above their hometown. Ethan and Evan walked to the bus stop, their steps in sync, their bond unbroken. "You okay?" Evan asked, his voice soft. Ethan nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, I think I am." For the first time, he felt the weight of his father's rejection lifting, replaced by a cautious hope. He wasn't ready to forgive, not fully, but he was ready to move forward, with Evan by his side and Noah waiting in Columbus. Back in the city, they returned to their lives, stronger for the journey they'd shared. Ethan continued his work at the community center, his voice a beacon for others like him. Evan found his place, joining Ethan at Pride events, his quiet strength a complement to Ethan's fire. Their parents visited, awkward at first, but growing more comfortable, Tom's efforts slow but steady. It wasn't the family they dreamed of as kids, but it was real, built on hard-won truths and love that refused to break. Years later, at a Pride parade in Columbus, Ethan and Evan marched side by side, their hands raised in defiance and joy. Noah walked with them, his arm around Ethan, while their parents watched from the crowd, Karen's eyes wet with pride, Tom's face softened by time and change. The twins had come out together, faced the world's cruelty, and emerged whole. Not because of where they started, but because of who they chose to be. Their bond, forged in pain and love, was their greatest strength, a testament to the power of standing together, no matter the cost.